Hey there, over the next 15 or 20 minutes, we're going to be talking about overcoming fear. My name is Salim Razai. I'm a ER physician down in San Antonio, Texas. I work out of 5 or 6 different ERs through the same hospital system. The group I work for is Greater San Antonio Emergency Physicians. I'm a community frontline doc that takes care of patients for a living. Recently had some changes happen to me at the workplace, and I thought it was very fitting and went nicely with this talk, and I hope you guys pick up some pearls from it. I have no financial conflicts of interest. There's nothing that I'm being paid for. There's nothing we're going to be talking about that I'm having somebody make me push it out to you. So I hope you find this useful. And probably the only other thing I need to disclose to you is that I run a free website called Rebel EM. It's a critical care blog that takes recent literature, kind of critically appraises it, breaks it down, and then kind of gives you a clinical bottom line to kind of help cut down knowledge translation time so that we can all take better care of the patients that we have in front of us. So let's start off by setting a foundation, and that foundation is that fear is one of the biggest enemies of success. We all have fears, whether it be at the workplace, whether it be about the big test that's coming up, or we messed up and now we got to figure out what we're going to do about that. There's so many things in life that we become fearful of. And I think it's important to understand that oftentimes this fear, it's unfounded. It's a mechanism to protect us, to keep us in a comfort zone. That's why we have it. We're fearful of things that haven't even happened yet. And I think that's really important to understand. The second thing I want to say is, I really like this quote: "Do the thing you fear, and death of fear is certain." I love this because anytime you do something that's scary the first time, of course it's going to be scary. But as you do it more and more and more, you start becoming more and more comfortable with it. And we're going to tap into that a little bit later on into this talk. Now, for me, fear can stand for one of two things. It could be forget everything and run, or face everything and rise. Now, the reason I mention this is because the words we use matter. In the first definition of fear, forget everything and run, this is almost like you're setting a challenge for yourself. Challenge has a negative connotation to it. Whereas face everything and rise is more like an opportunity. It has a more positive connotation with it. And I think that's the way we should look at things that we get nervous about or that we get scared about or when we get stressed, is that this is always an opportunity to grow, to gain more knowledge, to become a better person, better physician, paramedic, whatever it is that you may do. You should look at it as an opportunity and not a challenge. Now, I told you that I wanted to talk a little bit about something that happened to me at work recently. And being that I'm down in San Antonio, Texas, in June, July, we started getting hit pretty hard with COVID-19. We got hit so hard, actually, that we had to expand from 3 to 9 COVID ICU units throughout our health system, in addition to all the other ICUs we have. And although this sounds like, well, that's what everybody else is having across the country, what we faced was we didn't have enough intensivists to cover all the units. So I ended up getting credentialed in 24 hours to start working up in the ICU. Now, why was I so fearful? Well, it's been 10 years since I've actually worked in an ICU. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I'm not fellowship trained in ICU care. I'm not an intensivist. I was nervous about screwing up, killing somebody, making a mistake. I had all these racing thoughts, doubts. I was completely out of my comfort zone. And so I really had to take a step back and break this down into 4 things that I think you will find as very tangible and something you can apply not just to learning, not just to medical practice, but any aspect of your life. So the first pearl has a part A and a part B. Part A is understand fear, and part B is to embrace it. So the way I like to think of understanding fear is, if you could make a distinction, it's what might happen versus what actually will happen. And you have to understand that fear is based on what might happen. Our minds always go to the worst possible place. and never to the best possible place. It's just, again, it's a protection mechanism. It's what we do. And the reason for this is that it keeps us in this comfort zone, right? And we oftentimes get so comfortable in this comfort zone that we forget about everything else that's going on around us. We forget about all the other opportunities and all the other things that are there. And the reality is that our comfort zones are actually really small. We all get lost in our own bubble. But the magic actually happens outside of our comfort zone when we're pushing ourselves. Just think about something that you had to work really hard for, that you had to really push outside that comfort zone. How much more valuable was that thing to you than the thing that was just given to you on a silver platter? And so that's just kind of the concept that I want you to think about here. For me, this was comfort zone being the emergency department, ICU being outside the comfort zone. Now, if you look at this Venn diagram, there's actually a circle in the middle. And I think it's important to touch on this circle in the middle because it's not like we just transition from one thing to the other thing and change just happens overnight. What I'm actually getting at is something that Bob talked about in his talk, which is this zone of proximal development. There's this kind of in-between where we can push ourselves, make little incremental adjustments and improvements. And we'll talk about that for our fourth point. But I just wanted to kind of just put it out there that the reason we have fear is because it's keeping us safe in our comfort zone. That comfort zone is really small, and really pushing ourselves is where all the opportunity, all the growth, all the knowledge, all the things that we need to continue becoming better providers and better human beings. The part B of Pearl number 1 is this plan that we concoct in our heads, and we all do it. And we paint this linear line. And for me, it was basically undergrad, college, Bachelor of Science, major in biology, apply to med school, go to residency, and then ultimately become an EM physician. That's basically the line I had painted for myself. Success consists of going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. So why do I have this quote here when I'm just telling you that I had concocted this linear line? And the point is that obstacles and challenges are going to happen, and they're the agents of growth for us. And it takes hard work. And so let me actually show you the reality of the way things happen for me. I went to college. I did fairly well, I think. I took my MCATs and I did decent on those as well. And I applied to med school. And guess what? I didn't get in. It was one of the hardest things that ever happened to me. I basically had to take a year off. I had to figure out why I didn't get in. I had to study harder. I had to reapply. I had to go to all the interviews. And I got to tell you, even though it was one of the lowest points in my life, it's one of the best possible things that could have happened to me because it taught me the importance of determination and work ethic and really working at the things that are important to you. Once I got to med school, I thought I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon. And after doing my third and fourth year rotations, it turns out I actually enjoyed emergency medicine more than I enjoyed orthopedics. And so it turns out I didn't like being in the OR all the time. So things happen, plans change. So as a matter of fact, I was so confused and lost, I decided emergency medicine wasn't it. I would do a combined residency program. I would do emergency medicine and internal medicine at the same time. So basically, that's a 5-year residency. So I had to apply for this, get in. I'm happy. I made it through, right? I did college. I did medical school. Now I'm in residency. I'm doing emergency medicine and internal medicine. Well, my intern year, we have to take in-training exams just to kind of tell us where we're at so that we know how much work we have to do in order to pass our boards. Well, it turns out I got the worst score in my class. This just, again, reinstated to me that I just need to work hard. I did so terrible. It was another low point in my life. And I hit the books and I studied and I spent time with my patients and I really tried to understand the pathophysiology of disease. And by the end of my 5 years of residency, I ended up being one of the top people in my class. Why am I telling you all this? Well, as I'm thinking about transitioning from working in the ED and now working in the ICU, the point is I didn't just all of a sudden become this master clinician in emergency medicine. There was a lot of bumps and hurdles along the way. And it took time, it took effort, it took studying, it took determination, it took work ethic, it took mistakes for me to actually get to the point that I'm at now. The ICU is going to be no different if I use those same principles. Pearl number 2, get some help. So what do I mean by this? Well, let me tell you another story. I think one of the best male tennis players in the world is Roger Federer. And I think he's so amazing because not just all the titles he won, but over the duration of time he was able to do it. Almost 2 decades. And that's insane in tennis. And when you think about it, he had a coach, he had a mentor, he had somebody that was helping him tweak his game, learn from mistakes. He didn't win every tournament he played. He lost some too. He lost several matches, but he had somebody pushing him and helping him kind of reinvent himself and add new aspects to his game. So why does this help us in terms of learning, in terms of medical practice? Well, if you look at the y-axis here, you can see performance. And if you look at the x-axis, you can see the number of reps or the amount of practice that we're doing. Now, most people can do something over and over and over and over again. And that's great. You'll get kind of comfortable and proficient at it, but without feedback, you have no idea if you're doing things right or you're just getting proficient at doing things wrong. And this is where a mentor or a coach can be really helpful. They can give you feedback, which allows you to make modifications to your learning, to your practice. And I think this is an important aspect, not just in medical practice. I think in every aspect of our life. Mental health. I think diet and exercise is another area that we can do this in, as well as what we do for a living. It's just amazing to me that pro athletes do this, and we don't do this readily in every other aspect of our life. Now, the one thing I want to caution you about is we oftentimes will get to a point where we feel so comfortable, our comfort zone, that we hit this stall point. We stop getting feedback, we stop modifying, and we just kind of plateau. And I just want you to be careful about that because there's always new research coming out. There's always new things to learn. Somebody can always teach you something. And so don't ever hit that stall point. Make sure you're constantly working to modify and improve. So what did I do? Well, I started tapping the intensivists at my shop where I work at. I started talking to intensivists that are friends of mine that work in other areas. I started looking for resources. I started following up on my patients. I started reviewing procedures. I started learning about ventilators again. I did a lot of kind of homework, which brings me to pearl number 3, which is we have to prepare and we have to practice to help us overcome fear. And what I'm getting at is nicely stated in this quote. We don't rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training. So here's another graph. Performance on the left, stress level on the x-axis. Now what's interesting about this graph is that if you don't have enough stress, your performance oftentimes is subpar, which is exactly the same as if you're panicked. You can get so panicked that you start working yourself into a tizzy that your performance is actually not good. And this is where practice, doing your homework, doing research, doing the things you need to do, where you get to a point of your new comfort zone, which I like to call my creative calm. That's the ideal state you want to be in during a stressful situation. So what am I talking about? Well, I had to start looking at central venous catheters again. I had to start looking at arterial lines. I had to look at chest tubes. I had to look at different tools I had for intubation and different medications that I wasn't using down in the emergency department. I started reading up on all these things. I started watching videos of people doing these procedures. I started doing mental rehearsal in my head so that when it came to game time, I could perform at a top level for my patients. Interestingly, I have one story for you. I was actually working one ICU shift recently, and I was putting a central line in a patient, and the neighbor started decompensating on the ventilator, and the nurse came to get me, and I couldn't stop doing what I was doing because I was in the middle of a procedure. And so we made some adjustments to the ventilator. We asked for a rapid chest x-ray. And by the time I finished up the central line, I was able to get over. The x-ray was being shot. The patient had a tension pneumothorax. So I had to quickly shift gears and put in one of these pigtail chest tubes into the patient. But the point is I had practiced and mentally rehearsed these things so much that I was able to be working on one procedure and able to instruct the nurses on what to do to prepare me for the next procedure. And this is not something that I frequently run into down in the emergency department because we usually have multiple people down there to help us. In the ICU, sometimes you're the lone doc. You're the only one. There's nobody else to help you to do these procedures. You're the only one that can do them. Pearl number 4, snack size pieces. So what do I mean by this? Well, anything you want to accomplish in life, you have to think about breaking it into smaller parts. So one maybe not well-known fact to you guys is one of my favorite fruits is pomegranate. Why pomegranate? It's super hard to come by, it's seasonal, and it takes effort to actually eat this thing. It's not like you can just bite into it or cut it wide open like you do an apple, or peel it open like you do with a banana. It actually requires us to break it into chunks and get the seeds out from each of those chunks so that we can enjoy the fruit. So it requires some effort, but it also requires us breaking it into smaller pieces. So what am I getting at? I'm talking about this concept of aggregation of marginal gains. You don't want to get overwhelmed by thinking about the big picture. It is important to keep those big pictures in mind, but breaking things into small parts that are achievable, that you can wrap your brain around, are going to be the things that get you to the point of achieving the bigger picture. So for example, think about getting better by 1% every day in one aspect of your life. Maybe it's learning a new language. Maybe it's a procedure you haven't done in a long time. Maybe there's something else you want to work on. But just imagine getting 1% better every day for a year. That's a lot of 1%. That's 365 1%. Can you imagine how much improvement you would make over that time if you could do that? Well, that's exactly what I did in the ICU. Ventilators are not one of my strong suits. It's an area that I know one or two modes, but that's basically about it. So that's exactly what I did. I sat down and I asked my intensivist, what modes are you guys using up there? And I did my homework and I learned about pressure regulated volume control and APRV, and I watched videos and learned about the flow diagrams and exactly how you titrate these things. Then I asked them if I could go up to the ICU and actually put my hands on the ventilators and make adjustments so that I could see exactly what I was doing. Well, I'd like to wrap this talk up by giving you guys kind of a consolidation of everything I just gave you. So there's 4 pearls. Number 1 is understand fear. Know that this is a protective mechanism to keep us in our comfort zone. We fear what we think might happen, but not what actually will happen. Number 2 is the words we use matter. And fear is an opportunity, not a challenge. So think of it that way when the next time you feel like you're being pushed. Number 2, get help. Pro athletes do this all the time. It's amazing to me that we don't do this in other aspects of our life. And I have certainly gotten several mentors in my life that have helped push me. And I think it's through feedback and modification that we can continue to improve. Prepare and practice. Make sure you got to do your homework, right? You got to sit down and you got to learn the basics. And I know it stinks and I know it's boring, but without having a strong foundation, you can't add layers to it. And then you need to practice these things. You need to get your hands on equipment. You need to mentally rehearse. And then finally, snack-sized pieces. You want to break things into small enough pieces that you can attain and achieve them. Realizing what the bigger goal is, but don't get lost in this big picture and get overwhelmed. Break it into little pieces so that you can achieve them. Remember, a lot of 1% adds up really quick. Well, I hope you guys got some useful pearls out of that. We're coming to the end of this talk, and I'm looking forward to the question and answer session. Obviously, in 15-20 minutes, I can't answer everything or go through every tangible detail, but hopefully some of that comes out in our question and answer session. And thank you so much for listening, and looking forward to our conversation.